The steering committee for Zambia's bondholders and the Zambian government have announced that they have reached an agreement to restructure Zambia's debt, which public sector creditors have accepted. Reacting to the announcement, the head of policy at Debt Justice, Tim Jones, said the deal is better than the first bondholder proposal that was rejected by creditor governments in October. But bondholders will still get paid back over 10% more than public creditors. From London, UK, Tim Jones, head of policy debt, joins me. Thank you so much, Tim Jones, for joining me today.
Hi, great to be with you.
Absolutely. Well, let's talk about this now. The steering committee for Zambia's bondholders and even the Zambian government have talked about reaching an agreement to restructure Zambia's debt, and then, which public sector creditors have also accepted. Is it Uhuru already?
It's better than the deal that was on the table in October. It does give significant debt relief to Zambia. We don't think it's as good as it could be or should be. And a big potential problem with the deal is that debt payments will increase by a very large amount if the IMF and World Bank make some small adjustments in their view of the Zambian economy. So there are some potential problems down the road. Also, this other creditors that they still need to strike deals with, as well as the bondholders. But it does give a potential end to these negotiations, which have been going on for so long.
All right, you've talked about a particular aspect where the IMF might need to, say that maybe Zambia's economy is getting better, and as a result, they would probably have to pay more. I would have thought that was a good one, because we also need to consider, the bondholders, not just the government. What do you have to say about that?
Well, the changes could be very minor, and some are not even related to the Zambian economy. So if the global economy is growing more, that's one of the changes that could lead to Zambia having to pay a lot more. And it's a cliff edge, so there could be some very tiny changes that lead to a huge increase in debt payments. But also, there is no corresponding fall in debt payments if the Zambian economy does worse than expected. So it's not reciprocal. And so the bondholders get paid either back a decent amount under the current deal, or they get paid back a lot more if these small changes happen. So it does cast a shadow over what could happen. That judgment will be made later in the 2020s, but it could end up leading to Zambia having to pay a lot more in the late 2020s and early 2030s.
All right, so what more do we need to know about this agreement, and how does it differ from the previous agreement? I know we've highlighted one or two things which of course stand out, but beyond these things we've pointed out, what are the other things that sort of differentiates this particular agreement from the previous one?
Mainly, it's just the bondholders are getting back a bit less. Before, we calculated that they were effectively getting repaid 73 cents on every dollar that had been lent. And under the new deal, we calculate they're getting repaid 62 cents. So there's a fall from 73 to 62, so that's savings for Zambia. And that's under the baseline deal if there aren't these big increases in payments following an IMF judgment. But that 62 cents is still more than the government creditors like China and the UK are getting. They're getting 55 cents. And so this means that bondholders are effectively still riding on the back of debt relief given by governments. And we don't think that's fair. These bondholders lent at the highest interest rates. They should have to be giving at least as much debt relief as governments have given.
All right, let's look at a requirement about enhanced repayment terms and higher coupons on Bond B if Zambia's debt carrying capacity, as assessed by the IMF and the World Bank, probably moves to medium from weak and all of that. So let's look at it. What are the factors that could affect, Zambia's economic stance?
Yeah, so there are things like the rate of growth of the global economy, not just the Zambian economy, and the level of reserves that Zambia has, remittances it's receiving from around the world, as well as exports, and then a whole host of judgments the World Bank makes about economic policies. And some of these can be quite contentious. things like privatization and trade liberalization.
If I get you correctly, are you saying that this judgment could be subjective and not necessarily objective? That's talking about, maybe Zambia's debt carrying capacity has improved, or any of the judgments that could come from IMF or the World Bank. Are you trying to say that it could actually be subjective and not objective?
Yes, there are so many different factors that go into the calculation that the IMF and World Bank can choose ways to skew the calculation in ways that they want. Now, we would hope that ultimately that means that they do stick with the better deal for Zambia, but we don't know that will happen. And it's a very weird clause to have included. If you want to make payments linked to whether Zambia does better or worse, you should just use something simple like how much has the government revenue increased in dollars. And you could do that and then say if the government revenue increases by more than expected, bondholders get a bit more. They should only get a bit. Most of that improvement should still be for the Zambian people. But then also you can say if Zambian government revenue is a bit less, then bondholders get less back. But that's not the kind of deal that's been done. What's been done is a very weird deal where just some minor changes could lead to an increase in payments of approaching 50%. And that is really such a huge increase in debt payments for Zambia based on some very small changes that ultimately lies behind a very subjective formula that the IMF and World Bank have.
All right, we know this particular process, that's having this debt restructuring and all of that, it's been beset by long delays. So help us put a picture of the impacts of the delays on maybe investment, economic growth, and the financial market so far, and how long it might take to reverse these trends in Zambia.
Well, there is an uncertainty created, and that might have impacted on investment. But there is also a flip side that Zambia has not been paying the bondholders and governments for the last over 3 years. And that has meant they've been able to use those savings to invest in the Zambian economy. So actually, Zambia's spending in areas like healthcare and education has increased over the last 3 years. And the Zambian economy certainly has done a lot better than if they carried on paying the debt. The debt crisis did not begin in 2020 when Zambia defaulted. It began several years earlier when the Zambian government was cutting spending in order to try and pay the debt. So while this process has taken far too long, it also has been much better that Zambia has defaulted and used some of those savings to invest in the Zambian economy rather than carrying on paying and cutting public spending. And so that's really important also for other countries that have high debt payments. Just seeing the problems Zambia has faced, it's still been better they've gone down the path they have than if they just tried on carry on paying at the cost of cutting further and further the public services of the Zambian people.
All right, just before we go, I'd like to throw this into the mix. Does Debt Justice's proposal for legislation in the UK and New York to ensure equal debt relief from private lenders have merit? I mean, what are the potential challenges and benefits of such legislation?
Yeah, so we think that this process has shown that there is a big difficulty in getting private lenders to agree to debt relief in a timely fashion and to agree to as much as is needed. And so debtors need more power in those negotiations. And one of the things that could be done is that these debts tend to be owed under law in the UK. For Zambia and many countries in Africa, their debts are governed by a UK law. And that means the UK could bring in legislation to give debtors more ability to negotiate these debt relief deals and make private lenders take part in debt relief. Remember, these bondholders lent at interest rates of 7%, 8%, 9%, and they charged such interest rates because they said that lending was risky. Well, that risk materialized with successions of economic shocks, including the COVID crisis. And so they should not get as much money back. That's the logic of their own lending. But they
Okay.
hold out and hold out for as much profit as they can get. So we need new rules to make these private lenders be less obstructionist in these negotiations. And that could be done in the UK because there is the debts are governed here in the UK.
All right, thank you so much. I mean, that's something to take home. Thank you, Tim Jones, Head of Policy, Debt Justice, for sharing your thoughts with us today.
Thank you.